Welcome back to our channel. This penny could be your hidden jackpot. Rare Lincoln cents selling for millions. Like and subscribe for more coin secrets. Sometimes the smallest things carry the biggest surprises. Every day, millions of pennies pass through our hands, tiny copper-coated reminders of loose change, tips, or forgotten piles in kitchen jars. We barely notice them anymore. But among all those countless coins, there are a few that hold a secret, one that could be worth more than a year's salary. Take the unassuming 1989 US 1-cent penny, for example. You might think of it as nothing more than a penny, but the right one can fetch a life-changing amount of money. The story of the 1989 penny is a quiet one, tucked between decades of change at the US Mint. By then, pennies had already undergone a major transition. In 1982, the Mint shifted from solid copper planchets to a copper-plated zinc core, drastically cutting costs as copper prices rose. But change always brings with it the potential for error. And in 1989, even though millions of pennies were struck in Philadelphia and Denver with perfect precision, a few slipped through the cracks with extraordinary mistakes. Collectors started to notice something unusual when pennies with the 1989 date began surfacing with doubled features. The telltale sign of a double die, letters that appear ghosted, dates that seem to have a shadow, revealed that some dies had been improperly hubbed, leaving behind this coveted anomaly. On the obverse, sharp-eyed collectors have spotted doubling on Liberty, the date, and even Lincoln's profile, giving the penny a distinctly layered look under magnification. These double-die pennies are incredibly rare, but when found, they command instant attention. Then there are the off-metal errors, which became legendary in numismatic circles. A small number of 1989 pennies were somehow struck on planchets meant for foreign coins or even dimes. They came out thinner, lighter, and with strange tones, a mistake born of the chaotic, fast-paced production floors where blank planchets can mix and mingle. These errors are so subtle that most people would never notice. But those who do are rewarded handsomely, and perhaps the most striking of all is the transitional anomaly. By 1989, the Mint was fully committed to zinc cores for all Lincoln cents. But a few old copper planchets from before 1982 somehow remained in bins and made their way through the presses, producing full copper pennies in a year when none should exist. These 1989 copper pennies are like ghosts from the past, and to collectors they are nothing short of gold. Some of these coins have surfaced in the most unexpected ways. There's the story of a man in Missouri who discovered a double-die 1989 penny while rolling coins to take to the bank, a faint but unmistakable doubling on Lincoln's date. That coin later sold at auction for a staggering sum. Or the young collector who spotted an unusually heavy 1989 penny, only to discover it was struck on a leftover copper planchet. That, too, went to auction and fetched an eye-watering price. These stories remind us that what we dismiss as ordinary can hold extraordinary value if we just take the time to look. Collectors, both seasoned and new, know the thrill of searching roll after roll of pennies, examining each under a loupe, hoping for that magical moment of discovery. Every jar of pennies in every kitchen cupboard has the potential to contain a hidden treasure. Condition, of course, is everything in the world of coins. A flawless example with crisp details and nowhere will always bring the highest price. But even well-circulated 1989 error pennies can sell for significant sums if the anomaly is rare enough. So what kind of value are we talking about here? Auction houses have recorded sales of rare 1989 error pennies, depending on the type and condition, anywhere from $40,000 all the way up to an astonishing $132,000. A fortune, hiding on the smallest, most overlooked coin in your pocket. So the next time you find yourself sorting pennies, don't rush. Slow down. Tilt each coin under the light. Look for doubling, check for unusual weight, feel for odd thickness. Because in that pile of what you thought was just pocket change, there just might be a 1989 penny that could change everything. The treasure might already be waiting in your hand, you just have to notice it. Sometimes the smallest, most ordinary things hide the biggest secrets. Every day, millions of pennies pass through our fingers, tossed into jars, dropped into vending machines, forgotten in drawers. We rarely look at them twice. But buried in all that change is a story of one very specific year, one coin that carries a mystery worth far more than its humble face value. The 1983 US 1-cent penny, at first glance, looks like every other copper-colored Lincoln cent. But for those who know what to look for, it can be worth a fortune. The story of the 1983 penny begins with one of the most important shifts in US mint history. Just a year earlier, in 1982, the mint made the bold decision to stop producing pennies out of solid copper. Rising metal costs had made copper too expensive, so they transitioned to a cheaper copper-plated zinc planchet. This change was invisible to the average person. The coin still looked the same, but the underlying metal was drastically different. And whenever there's a transition like this at the mint, rare errors are almost inevitable. In 1983, something happened that no one expected. Among the millions of Zincor pennies struck that year, a few were discovered that didn't fit the mold. These were pennies with the 1983 date struck on the older, heavier, solid copper planchets. Somehow, leftover copper blanks from before 1982 found their way into the presses and were struck, creating what collectors now call transitional errors. They're incredibly rare, and to find one is to hold a piece of history in your hand, a perfect snapshot of a moment when the mint's machinery and procedures slipped for just a second. But that's not the only secret hidden in the 1983 penny. This year is also famous among collectors for an astonishing double die error on the reverse. In this version, the words 1 cent and United States of America appear clearly doubled when viewed under magnification, giving the letters a ghostly, layered effect that's unmistakable to a trained eye. This doubling happened because the die itself was improperly hubbed, essentially engraved twice at a slightly shifted angle, and those flawed dies were used to strike actual coins before anyone noticed. The result is a striking visual anomaly that makes these coins highly prized by collectors. Stories abound of these pennies turning up in the most unexpected places. A high school student in Illinois, sorting through his lunch money, noticed that the lettering on the back of his 1983 penny looked strange. A few months later, he learned it was one of the famous double die reverses, and his find ended up selling at auction for a sum that helped pay for college. Another tale tells of a retired machinist who had been saving pennies in a coffee can since the 1960s. Deciding to cash them in one afternoon, he noticed one felt heavier than the others. It was struck on a copper planchet by mistake, one of the rarest transitional errors from that year. That single coin would later sell for tens of thousands of dollars. It's easy to imagine how many of these coins are still out there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone with a keen eye and a little patience to discover them. Collectors know the thrill of hunting through rolls of pennies, scanning each one for that faint doubling on the reverse or that telltale heavier feel of a copper blank. They know that in a single moment, what was just spare change a second ago can turn into something extraordinary. Condition plays a big role, of course. The cleaner, sharper, and more pristine the coin, the higher its value. A mint state 1983 double die reverse penny or a flawless transitional copper planchet error can command astronomical sums at auction. But even circulated examples, worn, but still clearly showing their anomaly, can fetch significant amounts of money because of their rarity. So just how much is that unassuming little penny worth if you find one of these rare versions? Auction records have shown 1983 error pennies selling for anywhere from $44,000 to an incredible $140,000. That's right, more than some people make in 2 years, all hidden in a coin most people wouldn't bother to pick up off the sidewalk. So the next time you find yourself holding a handful of pennies, don't rush to get rid of them. Look closely. Check the weight. Examine the reverse under a light. Look for the doubling, feel for the heft. Because one day, you just might find yourself staring at a piece of history, a 1983 penny that could change your life. The treasure is already out there, waiting for someone like you to notice. Every day, millions of pennies slip through our hands unnoticed. They rattle in pockets, collect at the bottom of purses, pile up in jars on dusty shelves. We hardly give them a second thought. But what if I told you that one of those tiny copper coins, minted in 1991, could be worth more than some luxury cars or even a year's salary? That's the secret of the 1991 US 1-cent penny, a seemingly ordinary coin hiding an extraordinary story. It was the early 1990s, and the US Mint was in full production mode, churning out billions of pennies each year. By then, the copper-plated zinc planchet, introduced in 1982, had become standard. Pennies looked and felt the same, but under the surface they had changed, and in that change lay the seeds of several rare and valuable errors. Among the 1991 pennies, collectors have uncovered a handful of remarkable anomalies that make this year stand out. One of the most coveted is the off-metal strike, where a 1991 penny was mistakenly struck on a planchet intended for a dime, creating a thinner, lighter penny that doesn't quite belong. Another is the dramatic double die obverse, a fascinating error where Lincoln's profile, the date, and the motto appear slightly doubled when magnified, creating an eerie shadow effect. These double die errors are highly prized in the numismatic world because of their visual appeal and undeniable rarity. Then there are the transitional planchet errors. Even though by 1991 the mint had fully adopted copper-plated zinc, a few solid copper planchets from earlier years seem to have slipped into the presses. At a glance, these heavier pennies seem like any other, but a scale reveals the truth. They're remnants of an earlier era that somehow survived nearly a decade to be struck again. These pieces are incredibly rare and highly sought after. Stories from collectors about these elusive coins only add to the magic. A man in Ohio, searching through a roll of pennies from his bank, found a strange-looking 1991 coin. Something about it seemed off. It was heavier than the others, and its color was slightly richer. He brought it to a coin shop, and after some testing, it was confirmed to be one of the rare transitional copper strikes, worth thousands. Another tale comes from a teenager in Oregon who was sorting change after buying lunch and spotted a faint doubling in the date on his 1991 penny. That double die error later sold for enough money to pay for his first year of college. It's moments like these that keep collectors combing through coins, roll after roll, year after year. The hunt is part of the reward, the idea that at any moment, a forgotten penny in your hand could turn out to be a priceless treasure. The condition of these rare 1991 pennies matters greatly. Coins with crisp detail and little wear, known as mint state, can fetch even higher prices than their circulated counterparts. But even pennies that show some wear can still be valuable if the error is clear. Collectors are willing to pay thousands for the opportunity to own one of these rare pieces of minting history. So how much are these 1991 pennies really worth? Auction records tell the story. Depending on the specific error, its condition, and its provenance, a rare 1991 US 1-cent penny has sold for anywhere from $38,000 to an astonishing $122,000. All for a coin most people would overlook, lying unnoticed in a pile of change. So the next time you empty your pockets or count out pennies at the register, take a moment to really look. Feel the weight. Check the date. Hold it up to the light and see if anything unusual catches your eye. Because somewhere out there, among the billions of pennies still in circulation, could be the 1991 coin that changes everything. Your hands might already be holding a piece of history, and a fortune just waiting to be discovered.